Welcome to Confession Room Files, where we dive into the darkest corners of the criminal mind and uncover chilling confessions from the world's most notorious criminals. In this episode, we examine the case of Diane Downs, a woman whose story has haunted the public for decades. Downs was convicted of the 1983 shooting of her 3 children, a crime she initially claimed was committed by a stranger. However, her behavior during the investigation and trial led many to question her version of events. In this exclusive interview, we hear from Downs herself as she recounts her side of the story, offering a disturbing look into her psyche. Throughout the conversation, Downs attempts to justify her actions, portraying herself as a victim, yet her contradictions and emotional detachment raise more questions than answers. Her chilling lack of remorse and contradictory statements provide a deeply unsettling insight into the mind of a convicted murderer. Stay with us as we analyze this exclusive jail interview and delve deeper into the disturbing mindset of Diane Downs. Don't forget to subscribe to Confession Room Files for more true crime content and expert analysis. Share your thoughts on this case in the comments below and join the discussion.
I've been through that night so many times. I've even been through it with my psychologist. It's very hard, it's very tearful. There are a lot of memories that, I don't know. A lot of people, when something traumatic happens to them, they suppress it immediately. I kept those memories because I knew that I was the only person that was going to be able to tell them what happened when we got to the hospital. And when I got there, the first thing I said was, call the doctor. Second thing was the blood type. Third thing was call the cops, because they've got to find him. And so I had to remember as much as I could remember. When this man shot my daughter, my first reaction was to snap back to my childhood, to the pain that had happened to me back then, my marriage, my entrapment by society. This man was bigger than me. He was stronger than me. He had more power because he had a gun. He was in control and I was not. And there was nothing I could do. And I stood there and I looked at Christy reaching, and the blood that just kept gushing out of her mouth. What do? You just stand there trapped. And then the gun kept firing and firing and firing. And it was monotonous. It just kept going. It was like a slow motion picture. And then he swung around towards me, and this is something that I did not recall when I was explaining to the cops, because it wasn't like a movie when I was telling them. I was telling them what happened, the important details. He shot my kids, I pushed him, I ran. And when he swung around, he was pointing, when he swung around, it hit the tips of my fingers. The gun hit the tips of my fingers, and that snapped me. And I went, wait a minute, I'm not trapped by society. I don't care if he is bigger. If I stand here and I say, yeah, here, take the keys. I mean, there's nothing I can do. You win because you have the gun. My kids are gonna die. And I'm not gonna let my kids die. And so instead of giving him the keys, I feigned throwing the keys. He did not take time to point the gun and shoot me, obviously, because he would have shot me the same way he did the kids. When he was swinging in the direction of the keys, firing the gun, he hit my arm. Everybody says, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It is still painful. I have a steel plate on my arm. I will for 1.5 years. The scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died, except maybe Danny.
What haunts you the most about that night?
What do I see most is blood coming out of Christy's mouth, because that's what I see. I can't see Danny, and I can't see Cher. Sherry was laying on the floor, and driving to the hospital, I don't know the sounds that were made at the initial shooting because I was on the outside, and all I could hear, I can't hear anything but gunshots, and I can see things, you know, that's it. Driving to the hospital, I can smell blood. I can not hear Cheryl. Cheryl's not making a sound. Danny is just crying real soft. So that sound stays in my mind, and the fact that Christy's choking, and then I'm yelling at her and screaming at her to roll over on her face, because I was trying to keep her from choking on her blood, and it just didn't dawn on me that she was shot in the chest and that the blood was coming from her chest, not going down in her.
Diane Downs' interview reveals a complex and contradictory psychological profile, characterized by emotional detachment and self-centered justifications. Her recounting of the traumatic events surrounding the shooting of her children reveals a lack of genuine remorse, instead portraying herself as a victim of circumstance. Downs exhibits a pattern of deflecting responsibility for her actions, attempting to rationalize her behavior by focusing on perceived external factors, such as her childhood trauma and societal pressures. From a psychological standpoint, her attempt to distance herself from the violence of the crime and minimize the harm caused to her children suggests a profound lack of empathy. This detachment is a common feature in individuals with antisocial personality traits, where the ability to feel remorse or guilt is significantly impaired. Downs's narrative is an example of cognitive dissonance, where her need to protect her self-image overrides the reality of her actions, making it difficult for her to fully acknowledge the severity of her crime.
How did your childhood affect you?
Everything that happens to you as a child contributes to how you turn out as an adult. To be honest, it made me a better person because I know all the mistakes. I know what not to do to my kids. I know what to avoid. One thing is to not be married. And that may seem very harsh, but I honestly don't believe that children need fathers. And they're nice to have around sometimes when they can do things to help you, but when they are mentally abusive, when they are harsh, and the way my ex-husband was, they're more a deterrent to the children than a help. And unless you can find a good father, there is no need for them.
Did your childhood affect your attitude toward men?
That has a lot to do with it. That had a lot to do with it for many, many, many years. I hated men with a passion. But yeah, I hated men for a long time. That's why I met Steve. That's why I married Steve, because Steve did not seem to be that way. Steve was always on his best behavior. He does the thing that most people do when they're dating, and that's put their best foot forward. Yeah. You're nice, they're punctual, they're everything they're supposed to be. And then you marry them and it's, hey Diane, can you let yourself in? I have to run down and look at a car.
Yeah.
That's what he did on our wedding day. Actually, I found it out the day I got married, and then within the next 2 months after that, I found out that Steve was exactly like my father. But it took me 2 years, 3 years to finally say, I can't take it anymore. He really, really is. He's not going to change. I am a person that believes that everybody's going to change for the better, given the right circumstances. If you be a good wife, if you don't nag, if you love them, if you're always there when they need them, if the food's always ready, if the house is always clean, they're going to change. He didn't change. And that's why, even though we were married for 8 years, only 3 of it was not tolerable. It wasn't tolerable, but that was the only 3 that I tried. After that, I quit because I didn't want to be. Okay, after I had Christy and after I had Cheryl, Steve had a vasectomy. It didn't work. And he never went back to get checked to see if it worked. He just figured, doctors know what they're doing, it must have worked. So after, I think it's, you're supposed to wait 10 weeks, be on some kind of contraceptive for 10 weeks, and then you're safe.
And then you check.
But you're supposed to check, yeah. He never went back because he was just too busy, and the doctor probably knew what he was doing. Well, I got pregnant, and I knew that I wasn't messing around with anybody, and that if I was pregnant, because I know what being pregnant feels like, I know how I got that way. And I told him about it, and he gave me heck. Oh, he was
is
just
Danny
furious.
or is Danny not?
That was the child that I aborted. Steve put me through hell with that one, and I had an abortion. Cheryl was colicky, Steve was bitching. I made Steve go back to the doctor or shut up. Don't accuse me until you know. The doctor said, yeah, you are fertile. I guess I goofed up. Come on in and we'll go ahead and do it again. Well, I was pregnant. So I was 20 years old, had 2 kids. Cheryl was colicky. My husband was a bastard. I'm sorry. And I had an abortion. And it was something that did not bother me for 2 years. And then I was at a fair in Arizona. I walked past a Right to Life booth, and they told me at the time that I aborted that I was 6 weeks. And I figured 6 weeks, that is a condition. You are not pregnant, that is a condition. It's a little ball of slime, you know, no big deal. It's a fetus is slime, I figured. I saw a 6-week fetus. That baby had arms, legs, fingers, toes, a head, eyes, that was a baby. It was a human being, and I killed it. And I felt so horrible about it, that I had killed somebody like that. I didn't kill it myself, but I hired a doctor to do it. And so I asked my husband to have his vasectomy changed, reversed. He refused. I asked him for a year. He kept saying no. I said, fine, I will find a suitable donor. I watched people I worked with. I picked somebody that was attractive, that was healthy, that was not abusive of drugs and alcohol and such, was strong, you know, bone structure, the whole bit, a good specimen. It was really clinical. It was really terrible. And I seduced him. And I know my cycle, and it only took once, and I got pregnant. I went home, and about a week later, I told Steve I was pregnant. And he goes, how do you know? And I says, well, I know my cycle. I know I'm pregnant. And he was really upset. For that whole 9 months, he put me through hell every day, every night. It was terrible, just railed on me constantly, told me to get an abortion, the whole bit. And then after the baby was born, he told me, if you have a girl baby, I might let you stay around. But if you have a boy, I'm kicking you both out on your butts, and you're going to take those two with you also, because how do I know they're mine? That kind of attitude. Well, I lived with that for 9 months. Well, when Danny was born, Steve, the reason it had to be a girl was because Christy was supposed to be a boy. I was so cruel and mean, I had a girl, and Steve just couldn't stand it. Got one more chance, Diane. Cheryl better be a boy. Well, Cheryl turned out being a girl. He came into the recovery room. He goes, well, where is he? I said, he's a she. He says, how could you do that? You know, we're not having any more kids. Crazy, flipped out. So if I was going to have another one, I better darn sure have a girl. Well, when Danny was born, he was a boy, and my first thought was, I'm dead. He's dead. What's he going to do to that baby? And then I didn't care. I mean, that was my baby. That was supposedly the baby that was going to replace the one that I'd aborted. And as soon as I looked at Danny, I said, you can't. That's a boy baby. And I just knew that the baby I'd aborted was a girl. I'd named her Carrie and everything. It's just a different human being altogether, you know. And a whole lot of emotion on that delivery table, and Steve standing there right beside me looking at me like, you witch, how could you do this? You're out, you know. And Dr. George handed Daniel to Steve, and from that point on, Steve spent the rest of the past 4 years trying to prove to people that he was not biased and not prejudiced, thereby becoming biased and prejudiced.
It is apparent that Diane's childhood trauma shaped her adult attitudes, especially toward men. She reports hating men for years, suggesting a deep-seated resentment, likely stemming from abuse and negative experiences with male figures. This could indicate a disorganized attachment style, often observed in individuals with histories of abuse. Diane's view of marriage, especially her belief that fathers are unnecessary unless they fulfill a specific role, also reflects her complex relationship with male authority figures. Her personal history of abortions and complex feelings toward pregnancy further suggest possible unresolved guilt, emotional distress, and difficulty managing her role as a mother. These emotional conflicts may have contributed to her later decisions and behaviors, including her manipulative actions and poor decision-making within relationships, ultimately leading to criminal behavior. Her sense of self-worth and understanding of family roles appear highly distorted.
You fought for Steve to get custody of the kids, and then you wrote a letter to your former boyfriend telling him that Steve was an unfit father for your children. A lot of people won't understand that, Diane.
But Steve is different than most people. Steve pointed an empty gun at my head at one time and pulled the trigger. Do you know why? He wanted me to marry him. That is crazy. CSD, I believe, is very careful in picking out the people that care for a child that they think has been abused. And right now, they believe that Christy has been one of the most abused children in the world. Granted, she was shot, but before that, she was never abused. But they believe that that's probably true. And so they're going to put Christy in a very, very good place. And so I know that Christy's in a good home. Yeah. And so I just decided that it was better that Christy be in a safe, a mentally stable environment rather than to be with Steve. And if I had walked up to Susan Staffel and said, please don't let them go to Arizona, or if I had called Furtick and asked the same thing, they would have sent the kids, or they would granted. They could not send the kids. They make suggestions to the court as to what happens to the kids. And they would have suggested to the court that the kids go merely because I don't want them to. That means Steve and I had a falling out. What better place could they be safe? Not realizing that they aren't safe from Steve even, and emotionally. And so I couldn't just count on them to cooperate with me. They haven't so far. I couldn't expect them to now. And so I had to find another way to tell them. And I know that my ex-boyfriend was a fink. He was taping for the cops. He admitted that he was every conversation that I had with him on the phone was taped and sent immediately to the DA's office. And I knew that that letter, if I sent it to him and he read it, would in fact get to the DA's office. But all the other letters that I'd been sending as of late were being returned. And so I knew that I had to do something to make that letter so enticing that he would open it.
Downs says she felt trapped in her marriage with Steve and hoped a divorce would solve their problems.
Was there ever a time during that you thought about taking your own life and
Oh, yeah.
went into the bathroom with the gun and shot it?
Yeah.
So that is indeed...
That is true. Only, no, it's not, that's a long one too. It takes many, many years of being mentally harassed, pushed into a corner. You can't go anywhere. You're trapped. It even stems from my childhood of being trapped. You know that you can't go away. You can't go someplace else. There's no place to escape to because they'll find you. They'll bring you back. You'll be punished somehow. Steve was the same type of person. He was the kind of person that, at nighttime especially, was his best time for fighting, and he would just rail on me, just fight and fight and fight, and there was no way to escape, no way at all. Well, after I got my divorce, I figured I was free of that, and I wasn't. Steve would still come to my house and still do the same thing, and this was 2 years after our divorce, and he came to my house, and I had taken a gun. He had a handgun. It was the handgun that he had put to my head, unloaded and fired, and I took it from him. I swiped it from him and I hid it in my house. And it was in my bedroom. He was doing it again, and he was getting very, very physical. Steve had just beat me up 2 weeks before that, beat me up terribly. There was blood all over the place. The sheriff's department came out and made a report on it, and my nose was all bruised, my face was bruised, my chest was bruised. He had choked me. I was terrified of him. He had never done that before. And for all I knew, this was 2 weeks later, he was going to do it again. And I ran in the bathroom, I ran in the bedroom and slammed the door. And he was coming through the door anyway, so I grabbed the gun and I ran in the bathroom and locked the door. And my first thought was, I'll never escape from him. I will never, ever get away. I divorced him, and that isn't even getting away from him. It doesn't matter what I do, I'll never get away from the insanity, except just to be oblivious to it. And I considered shooting myself, but it was a .22 handgun, and Steve had said, you can't kill anybody with a .22. Surprise. There's no way you could kill somebody, you would hurt them badly. And then I thought, besides, my kids need me. I can't die. Then I thought maybe I should kill him. And then I said, same gun, same situation, I would hurt him, he would be furious, then I'm really going to be in trouble. And so I said, what do I do? How do I tell him I'm serious?
The gun went off?
Yes, I fired it to scare the hell out of him. I wanted him to know that I was serious enough that if he kept this up, if he kept doing what he was doing to my mind, someday perhaps that would be pointed at a person. Not now, but someday. And I fired the gun, he went, oh my God, and he broke the door down. And I sat there and I handed him the gun and I said, now do you believe me? And he took the gun and he said, yeah, and he left.
Diane's statements reveal a deep psychological struggle shaped by her traumatic past, particularly her abusive relationship with Steve. Her feelings of entrapment and hopelessness stem from both her childhood and her marriage, where she was physically and emotionally abused. The mention of the gun incident, where Steve pointed an unloaded weapon at her, demonstrates a significant element of fear and control in her relationship. Diane's belief that divorce would resolve her issues was shattered when Steve continued to invade her life even after their separation. Her emotional instability is evident in her contemplation of suicide and her extreme sense of powerlessness. Her decision to write to her ex-boyfriend, knowing it would be used against her, reflects a warped sense of agency where she seeks an outlet for her frustration and desperation. Overall, Diane appears to be struggling with severe trauma, distrust, and a desire to escape a cycle of abuse, leading her to make decisions driven by emotional distress rather than rational thought.
I don't even cry in front of my family. And I can go to my room and I can write in this diary, this record book, some of my fears. And it's really even sketchy. I don't write in a lot of detail. There are days when I'm overwhelmed with emotion, and the book will be rather emotional, but very few days. It's just sitting in front of the book and writing down little sentences and then being able to cry over it and feel emotionally everything that I don't physically write down. And it's a very good release. It's therapy in a way. It's also a way of keeping a record, because in the beginning so many things were said to me that were denied later. Oh, it's so sad.
Have you ever thought of the fact that your writing these things could be used against you or in your favor at any future time?
No, I didn't, because I never thought the book would be made public. I got pregnant because I miss Christy and I miss Danny and I miss Cheryl so much. I'm never going to see Cheryl on earth again. And you can't replace children, but you can replace the effect that they give you. And they give me love, they give me satisfaction, they give me stability, they give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy, and that's gone. They took it from me. But children are so easy to conceive.
Obviously, everyone is curious who the father is, and I know you probably don't want to talk about that. Does the father know who he is?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and that's why I won't talk about it, because he feels as privately about this child as I do.
What would you do, given this current situation, if they said, if they took away your kids, and then they went one step further and said, we think you're an unfit mother?
We're going to take away this one? I don't know how they're going to do it. What if I'd like to see them try to take this baby from me, and how? How could they do it? They're going to have to wait a long time to do it. Hopefully this thing will be cleared up by then. I don't know that they could do this, take it away after it's born. I don't know. I've never even talked to my attorney about it, because it seems so, let's put it the way the DA says, it's laughable.
Downs says her parents were shocked when they found out she was pregnant again.
My parents are the kind of people that wish you would do everything by the book in the order that it's pre-written. You get married before you have a baby. And being married is not, and never has been, I take it back. When I was young, when I was 16, 17, 18, being married was the most important thing in the world to me. And I think it's because I was raised that way. Most girls are. Yeah. But since that time, since my divorce, being married has been an iffy thing. I can do it if I want. I don't have to if I don't want it. And it's never been uppermost in my mind. My children are. My children always have been. And having children is, I think being a mother is the most wonderful job that any woman could perform. I die every day. When I go to bed, I cry at night. Even now, I still cry. I dream about Cheryl. I dream about Cheryl reaching out with me with her arms and always giving me a kiss and saying, I love you, I miss you, where have you been? It's almost as if she really is coming back and saying, how come you're not here with me? One time, it was right after Christy went to the foster home, I dreamed that Cheryl came to me. Well, Christy came to me. And I said, Christy, how did you find me? And she said, Cheryl brought me. And Cheryl came walking out of the shadows. And there was blood on her shirt. And it was really spooky. And I said, Cheryl, I thought you were dead. And she goes, no, I was faking it. I knew they were going to take Christy away and she wouldn't be able to find you, so I brought you. And then Cheryl showed us how to sneak Danny out of the hospital and everything. It was a wonderful dream. It was wonderful because we were the Four Musketeers and we were together again. But anyway, my dad knows how much I was grieving for the kids, and so he couldn't very well condemn the fact that I was having a child, because it's, like I said, it's not a full replacement. You can never replace a child. I tried to do that with Danny. Danny was a replacement for a child that I had aborted many, many years ago when I was quite young and foolish. And I found at that time when Danny was born that he is a person in himself. You cannot replace a child with a child. They are individuals. And this child is not to replace Cher, never. Cheryl's always going to be with me. How could I replace her? She's still here. But it's somebody to keep me company until Chris and Dan come home. Somebody that I can love and feel and talk to. It's not like you're talking to yourself anymore. There is somebody there, and that's all this is. And so my dad couldn't really condemn.
Diane's narrative reveals several signs of mental health challenges, particularly related to trauma and emotional instability. Her recurrent feelings of being trapped, intense emotional reactions, and erratic mood swings suggest potential borderline personality disorder, BPD, characterized by instability in relationships, self-image, and emotions. Additionally, her recounting of traumatic events, such as physical abuse and ongoing fear for her safety, points to symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, including intrusive thoughts, nightmares, and emotional re-experiencing of trauma. The pervasive sadness and hopelessness she expresses, coupled with her coping through emotional release in a diary, suggest major depressive disorder. Her difficulty adjusting to life changes, such as divorce and custody battles, could also indicate adjustment disorder. These factors reflect a complex interplay of emotional distress, trauma, and difficulty managing interpersonal relationships, all of which likely contribute to her ongoing psychological struggles.
Remember that there was more than one person there that night? I mean,
No.
long after?
No. That is another thing that I suppose if you listen to the different tapes that were made, tapes by my ex-boyfriend, tapes by the sheriff's department, you would understand a psychological pattern that was being built up. It's something that I did not even understand at the time because, first of all, I trusted the cops. And even though I didn't trust the cops, I was forced into a position of saying they're the only people that really can help me. They're the only people that will try to find the person that did this. And you're trapped in a position of having to trust somebody even though you don't know.
The police found blood on the outside of the car. Could one of the children, perhaps Cheryl, have fallen out of the car on the passenger side?
The DA has come up with this idea that somebody was shot on the outside of the car, on the passenger side of the car. I was on the driver's side of the car when I was shot. And that's why it was so, it was planted. And it just seemed, I mean, it can't be real because they talk about blood spatter. And when they say spatter, I think something being shot out, like the blood spatter in the car. You know, it was so uniform, it was so regular. The same size droplets spread evenly in a pattern. And when they say spatter, that's what I thought of. And we saw pictures of this so-called spatter. It's drops. When they took the kids, they took Chris and Cher out of the driver's side of the car. And it's blood droplets. It's when they picked the kids up and carried them over the threshold, there is blood dripping down the side of the car. The thing that really, really haunts me the most is not even the sight and the sound. I mean, the sound and the smell are fading. But at night, when I close my eyes, I can see Christy reaching her hand out to me while I'm driving, and the blood just keep coming out of her mouth. And that, maybe it'll fade too with time, but I don't think so. That haunts me the most.
From her attempt to justify the brutal shooting of her children to her emotionally distant recounting of the events, Diane Downs' behavior points to a deeply disturbed individual who still struggles to take full responsibility for her actions. Her lack of genuine remorse and emotional detachment reveal a dangerous psyche, one that continues to raise questions about her true motivations. Want to dive deeper into criminal psychology and the minds behind these horrific acts? Subscribe to Confession Room Files for more exclusive insights, expert analysis, and in-depth looks into the most disturbing cases. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we uncover the chilling truths behind the world's most notorious criminals.